Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football pre-spring practice ACC rankings heading into the 2024 season. Dill, you asked me how I feel about my ACC projections. Not great. It changes every single day for me. I look at these top three teams, Miami, Florida State, Clemson. It changes every single day. All three of these teams legit contenders to win that conference. And that's not to write off some teams like NC State and Louisville, who I think did some really nice things in the ACC and in the transfer portal as well. Really excited to get into this. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it truly has been a blast taking deep dives into all these programs heading into spring practice. The amount of support you guys continue to show to the boys means the absolute world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, let me hear it in the comment section. Drop your ACC rankings in the comment section. We'll chop it up. Dill, I'm going to give you the T-box, and I'll let you critique here. I got Miami, Florida State, Clemson. How are we feeling about it?
As it stands, I think I have Florida State, Clemson, Miami. And it's tight. Again, I think like FanDuel, you look at their preseason odds, that's crazy to put Miami that far behind those two teams. Because I do think you look at Miami, I'm kind of with you. Pound for pound, they might have the most talented roster. I'm not sure yet I'm totally sold on like the culture being in place, that winning culture where you can string together and win enough of those big games to win a conference title yet. I believe that very wholeheartedly with Mike Norvell and what he's got. And that's probably why I have Florida State kind of at the top. But it's tight because roster to roster, these two teams are really tight. Miami might have the edge, though.
Man, you're sleeping. I think I texted you yesterday morning when I was watching some Clemson from 2023. Said, I think we're sleeping on the Clemson Tigers as well. I think all three of these teams have legit shots to win the ACC. I think they're by far the three favorites in my eyes. Dill, I think you said it best, right? You look at this Miami Hurricanes roster, and I say it's the most talented team in the ACC. Now, who do you trust more, Mario Cristobal versus Mike Norvell, Dabo Swinney, in terms of winning games, in terms of having that winning culture in place? You lean Florida State, you lean Clemson. I want to start with the quarterback conversation. Going into any college football season, that's kind of where I start. And I guess I'll ask you this question first. Out of these three quarterbacks at the top of the ACC, how are you stacking them?
Probably have Cam Ward, DJ, Cade. And a lot of it, frankly, is tough for Cade because right now I'm starting to get a little bit concerned, just frankly, with the state of the Clemson offense overall. Yes. You saw how much better DJ you looked at Oregon State, and I think for a while you saw some really good quarterbacks come through Clemson, and they made it work for sure. But there's just been something off. Nothing's looked easy. It's been very sluggish for a handful of years now. And at this point, I feel like we were all giving them the benefit of the doubt, like, oh, they'll get it together. They'll get it together. Now they got to show me. And right now, I think that's where I'm at with Clemson, kind of why I have them below Florida State.
And there's a lot of reasons to be excited about Clemson. For one, that defense is going to be absolutely phenomenal. Again, Cade Klubnik only going into year three. I mean, 2023 was his first year starting at the college football level. So there's some reason to be optimistic about this offense. I think they did a phenomenal job on the recruiting trail, bringing in some talent at wide receiver. They were obviously very banged up there in 2023. Though I have the exact same quarterback rankings, but I'll tell you what made me kind of lean Miami. You look at the quarterback position, obviously being the most important position in the sport of football. Cam Ward excites me for a couple of reasons. One, you saw Cam Ward play phenomenal football at Washington State the last 2 years. Now I start thinking about, okay, what is Cam Ward going to look like with this Miami Hurricanes team? You're talking about, in my mind, the best offensive line that we'll see in the ACC that Miami has. That is much better than what he was dealing with at Washington State. He has much better weapons at Miami than he did at Washington State. I think you see this Miami Hurricanes offense take some massive strides in the right direction because of that quarterback play. And that's why I think we kind of tip the scale for Miami. Now, getting into Florida State, Dill, I just talked about Florida State this morning. DJU, a ton of upside, right? There was a reason he was a 5-star coming out of high school. The other thing that excites me about Florida State is they have so much upside at the wide receiver position. I mean, you talk about not a ton of proven production coming back, but I mean, Hakeem Williams going into year two. You're bringing a guy like Malik Benson, who is absolutely dripping with traits, runs a 10-4 in the 100-meter. That passing attack for Florida State, if Mike Norvell can work that magic that you saw him work with Jordan Travis over the last couple of years, you're looking at a Florida State passing attack that has the potential to be extremely good in 2024 as well.
And that will be an interesting story because I do think people sleep on how good Mike Norvell's done with quarterbacks. I mean, you saw Jordan Travis make unbelievable strides over the course of his career at Florida State. From where he was, really wasn't a quarterback his first time you saw him. You saw the game, or you saw the toughness, you saw the things you want to see from a mentality standpoint. But as a quarterback, it really wasn't there. And by the end of it, I mean, he was right up there with guys in the ACC. Obviously, not necessarily a top pro prospect, but in terms of college quarterbacks, great. And you're taking a guy in DJU who, again, you started to see the signs of him getting it and figuring it out. And man, if Mike Norvell can do what he did with Jordan Travis, you might have to flip my quarterback rankings up to DJU because I think he probably has a bit of a higher ceiling than Cam Ward. Cam Ward's got a really high ceiling, but DJU's ultra talented and a better athlete.
I mean, both. I think that's what's exciting about both programs is the ceiling for quarterback play with Miami and Florida State. And you could even throw in Cade Klubnik too. Cade Klubnik, a 5-star in his own right, awfully high ceiling. You just got to see him put it together. Though the second evaluation that I kind of made me lean Miami was I think Mario Cristobal is building this team from a personnel standpoint in the right way, right along the line of scrimmage. You look at that offensive line. I don't know if I'm taking an offensive line in the ACC over Miami. So you couple that with what I think is the top quarterback in the conference, now the top offensive line in the conference. That's what excites me the most. And that is something that I'm really interested between Florida State and Clemson in terms of what does that offensive line look like in spring practice heading into 2024. Both Florida State, Clemson returning a ton of production on the offensive line, but units that weren't necessarily great in 2024. Now for Florida State, I think they're trending in the right direction. 3-4 years ago, that offensive line was an absolute disaster. They've consistently gotten better. If Florida State can take that next stride on the offensive line, that makes you feel better about them. And Clemson too. They dealt with a lot of injuries, but they got some guys that you're kind of excited about and a lot of returning production on that offensive line as well.
I mean, Florida State's offensive line, the way they perform, I think kind of determines where this team can go at the end.
I think I agree with that.
If they can run the ball really effectively, and they did not run the ball very well last year, they hit a couple chunk plays because Benson was obviously a freak show and really was good, but they need to be a little more consistent. They need to have something they can go to. And again, I think you're kind of right. You look, brought in a guy like Richie Leonard, I think does add something to that unit, a really experienced guy, maybe not the highest upside guy in the world, but brings in some stability. Bring in Ferguson as well, maybe a little more upside, maybe a little more talent, and then return a bunch of guys. Again, this unit, if they play really well, I don't even think this ACC is particularly close, frankly. I think Florida State.
I mean, I don't know. That seems that's a lot. Now, for Florida State, I think it comes down to staying healthy on the offensive line. You could tell that offensive line was just not healthy. They were rotating guys in. They were doing load management on the offensive line. Never a spot that you want to be in. If they can just stay healthy, I think you're just going to see a better unit because they're healthier. They're more 100% in 2024. Now, getting to the defense, this is where I want to bring in Clemson. And this is why I texted you the other day and said, hey, we're sleeping on this Clemson Tigers program. You look at the front seven, you ask me to say, hey, who has the best front seven in the ACC? I think Miami has done a phenomenal job. Guys like Ruben Bain can really get it done. Though I'm going to lean Clemson, right? You talk about Peter Woods. You talk about TJ Parker. You talk about Barrett Carter. Wade Woodaz, I think, is a phenomenal linebacker for Clemson. I'm going to lean Clemson for the best defense in the ACC heading into 2024. And I think how good that defense is with potentially a step with this Clemson offense, I think that puts them right into the thick of things with these top three contenders in the ACC.
And that is what Clemson will always have at this point, it feels like, because I think you're right. That defense has been good. They've been carrying their end of the stick. It's up to the offense. I think you look, talent's going to be there again. I loved what that young group of secondary guys kind of started to go towards the end of the year. And again, they're losing a couple guys for sure, Wiggins, Makuba, but those youngsters looked really good towards the end of the year. A thing that you've seen with Clemson, really developing talent on that side of the ball and getting the most out of guys. But I think you look, I don't know, Florida State and Miami can play defense in their own right. I think you look at Florida State, one of the better secondaries, I think, in the country. I love what they have. I love their young guys. I think that's going to make it really hard for everyone in the ACC to deal with them, because if you can't throw the ball effectively, and I think that's kind of what Florida State was able to do a lot last year, was just make it really hard to hit big plays and do things, you can be really hard to deal with.
Two things that what you said. One, the Florida State defense flew so far under the radar. That was part of my frustration of leaving them out of the college football playoffs. Not a road we need to get down today. But that defense, I mean, sacked the quarterback 9.3% of the time. That was top 6 in the country. Had the number 1 secondary in terms of completion percentage allowed last year. That Florida State defense was elite. You noted it best, that secondary, which I fully expect to be very good again in 2024. Before we move on to some dark horse candidates, I do want to just note something on Clemson. TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, Antonio Williams, Adam Randall, Tyler Brown, those wide receivers are all guys that are going into their first, second, or third year, with Cade Klubnik going into his third year. There is a lot of juice left to be squeezed in terms of offensive talent on that Clemson team, not to mention Phil Moffitt, who I think is a phenomenal running back. There is some bones when I look at that Clemson team on paper and say, this Clemson offense can take a massive stride. They just need to work on it schematically.
That's part of the issue is like we've kind of been saying this for a couple of years now. We have there have been some good wide receivers. I know the wide receiver play for sure, but there's an element of like, well, there's just guys who've kind of underperformed. Like EJ Wilson, like, you just never felt like you got the most out of him, and some other guys. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I guess to me, I'm a little bit further in the camp now. Now you got to go prove it because again, we've had this too many years straight.
Yeah, but I guess I'll close it on this. This is, in my mind, by far the most talent you've seen on this Clemson offense since the Trevor Lawrence days. In my mind. And now if Cade Klubnik can put it together, you see a little bit more of an offense that can attack downfield. Again, averaged, I think, 6.2 yards per pass attempt. It was like 106 in the country. It's pathetic what they were doing attacking the deeper third. If they could take some strides there, I like what Clemson has on paper.
If they do that, they're the favorite. I mean, like, I love what they have on defense. Yeah. It's about their offense. If their offense plays really well, you might have the return of the Clemson, if you will.
All right, let's get into some of these outside contenders. And Dill, I want to start with NC State. Now, I haven't done full position deep dives on that whole program. Was looking at the schedule late last night. Absolute sicko hours. It was like 11:30 at night. We're looking at NC State's schedule. Really like the schedule. And then you start talking about, all right, what you kind of know NC State's going to have a good defense, right? Dave Dorn, Tony Gibson. That's kind of a given that NC State's going to be tough as nails on the defensive side of the football. Part of the reason why we were also high on NC State last year was Brennan Armstrong maybe getting kind of resurging his career at NC State. Kind of an epic failure there. You're bringing in Grayson McCall. There was a time during the offseason where I was banging the table for Florida State to kick the tires on Grayson McCall in the transfer portal. Not an NFL guy, but a guy that, 70% career completion percentage, has thrown for over 10,000 yards, a guy that has got it done at the group of 5 level. If NC State can get the best out of Grayson McCall with guys like Kevin Concepcion and you bring in Noah Rogers, it's an offense that I think can take some strides in 2024. And you pair that up with a very good Dave Dorn defense, and you pair that up with a very gettable schedule for NC State, a schedule that kind of reminds me of what Louisville's schedule was last year. I mean, this is a team that I don't think I'd be surprised. I look up at Halloween and say, this is a team that's right in the thick of it to make an ACC championship game.
And NC State's been year in and year out with Doran. He's done an incredible job there. Again, he gets the most out of his talent. I think you kind of got to look for that offensive line to improve. That's, to me, what kind of fell off for that program. They've been so good at that position. In last year, it just wasn't it. If they play solid up front, I mean, you just look, this team, that's the operative word. It's solid. They're not going to be the favorites. They don't have that top-end talent, but they're really good, really deep. You look at Louisville, I think this is where you're going to take the most heat, frankly, because I think most people think Louisville should be up there closer to Miami than you think they are. That's at least what the odds makers think. I'm kind of with you. I got my questions because I think last year, I don't want to say they survived by the skin of their teeth, but a lot of things went well in ways that it's hard to repeat. Like maybe like the Michigan State season in 2021, where they just won every big game, every close game. I do question like the top end talent. I know they did a decent job in the transfer portal, but I still think you're trying to build that culture up through what you got to do. And you want to see a little more high school recruiting. You want to see more of the meat of that team come together and be developed in the way Jeff Brom should do it. I think you're still waiting on that. So I kind of with you. I think they're on the outside looking into this top picture, but I like where they're going, the direction, especially if they can bring that high school recruiting up.
Really like Louisville. And quite frankly, I don't think this ACC conference gets enough credit for, I think, how good it can be in 2024. Dill, I think the biggest story with Louisville is they made an ACC championship game with subpar quarterback play in 2023. I mean, Jack Plummer was just not it for that Cardinals offense, and you saw Jeff Brown really have to change what he wanted to do on offense to kind of work around a quarterback that was just, quite frankly, limited. What excites me most about Louisville is you return guys like Ashton Gelati on the defensive side of the football. Like, this defense was really good last year. I think it's going to be really good this year. The kicker here is Tyler Shuck, a guy that I think has a lot of upside if he can stay healthy, a massive upgrade from Jack Plummer last year. Louisville's right up there with NC State. That's kind of a pick 'em for me. Again, I'd probably put them in the tier below Miami, Florida State, Clemson, just because you said it. I think those three teams have recruited, have that top-end talent throughout that roster that just Louisville doesn't have yet. But I really do like Louisville and what they're doing. That's another team that I think certainly could be kind of a spoiler in the ACC. Though another sneaky team here, like Brent Pry in Virginia Tech. What they did and stands out to me is, one, you saw that team put it together in 2023, right? They went from a really poor season in 2022, took some massive strides in 2023. They returned 21 of 22 starters. That is a phenomenal amount of returning production in the era of NIL and transfer portal. And what excites me the most is they got a quarterback that has a ton of upside in Kyron Drones. This is a guy that if he puts it all together, there was a reason he was a very touted quarterback coming out of high school. He's a big body that's athletic and he can use his legs and also has a really big arm. Still, Virginia Tech's not a flashy team on paper, but it's a team that won a lot of football games, a massive fan of what that culture is going into 2024. Another team that you catch Virginia Tech on a Friday night, like Enter Sandman, that's dangerous.
It is dangerous. And I'm kind of like, that team looked the part last year. It felt like for a while, everything just looked a little slower. They didn't look as physical. Last year, everything kind of came back up. I mean, their defensive line was rocking. I felt like there were some games where they really kind of asserted themselves in a way you didn't really see Virginia Tech do. And you're like, they're getting back a ton of talent. And the fact that they were able to retain that, and if Brent Pry and that team can develop again the way they did the previous year, yeah, they're dangerous. I think the quarterback play is going to be huge because I thought it was pretty bad last year for the most part. I thought that position cost them too many games with mistakes. It wasn't like bad per se. You saw flashes of good play, but like you think back to that Rutgers game, you can't play that poorly at the quarterback spot. If they can get more a steady hand there, which they should, with Kyron Drones just getting another year under his belt, yeah, they're really, really dangerous. You don't want to play them, I don't think, especially not at home.
Definitely not at home, though. We got to make it down to Blacksburg one of these years. Next team, newcomer, ACC, SMU. This is going to be a team that I think takes a lot of people by surprise, quite frankly. Like Preston Stone, I think at the quarterback spot, really good. Now, Rhett Lashley and what he's done, not only do I think he's a phenomenal coach, I think he designs really good offenses. He's done a really good job, not only grabbing some top-tier talent from the high school ranks, but doing a really nice job grabbing some guys in the transfer portal. And this is a roster that, I mean, kind of looked at what they did in the transfer portal the last couple of years. It's got a lot of talent. It's got a lot of playmaking ability. And quite frankly, Preston Stone, I think one of the better quarterbacks in this conference. This is going to be a team that, again, I think a lot of, Clemson or Florida State, Miami looks at SMU on the schedule and might pencil in a win. This is a team that is going to be extremely competitive, can score points with the best of them in this ACC conference. This is you talk about throwing a wrench into this conference. I think SMU has the ability to be a top 25 team in the country.
They're a fascinating one because it is kind of that portal story. I mean, they brought in a ton of guys, Kenneth Gell. Like, you always have that question. You obviously see teams like Louisville, Florida State make it work for sure. But you do have the question. But talent's talent. Like, this team's, again, they don't have the Miami, Florida State, Clemson talent, but they're not as far away as I think people think when you make that transition from the group of five level to power five. I think they're much closer.
And I'll say this too, there's a lot of meat and juice left to be squeezed for this program. Like, I think having that power five logo on their jersey, this is
bring back the Pony Express a little bit.
Yeah, but I think this is a team that we're going to be talking about in 4 or 5 years is like kind of a premier team in college football. I think at least the potential at that SME program is certainly there. Now, getting to the next tier, Duke really excites me with Malik Murphy, like a really high upside quarterback that you saw him flash in the spring game. You saw him have some kind of take his lumps during that 2023 season coming in for Quinn Ewers. I like Manny Diaz. I think I'm a lot higher on that hire than a lot of people around the country are. I think going into his second stint as a head coach, using some of the things that maybe he kind of failed at with Miami, I think you're going to see a decent Duke team. UNC, they continue to recruit at a decently high level, but losing Drake May just, to me, feels like a missed opportunity in terms of not taking advantage of when you have an NFL caliber.
Even the fact that they just didn't do a whole lot with Drake May, I think,
maybe
you start to question Mac Brown a little bit. Like, does he still have it? Because
100% you're questioning.
They're too talented to play the way they did when you have a quarterback at his ilk. I thought that it was a really disappointing year. And I don't necessarily see how it gets much better.
I'm kind of with you, right? Like UNC last year, you kind of have them as not a favorite, but definitely probably that first team in the outside contender. They're a dark horse because they still got some talent, but I'm not that high in UNC. It's Georgia Tech, Brent Key. I like what they're building. Cal, a newcomer. Dill, I want to highlight Syracuse real quick. That's another program that I think we're going to be talking about in a different tier in the next couple of years. I think that was a phenomenal hire. Going out and getting probably the best recruiter on the trail in Fran Brown, stick him in as a head coach. I don't know if this roster is quite ready to be ultra competitive in 2024, but you talk about 2025, 2026, Fran Brown, work in the transfer portal, work in the recruiting classes. I think that's a Syracuse team that I think is trending in the right direction.
I love that hire. I think more teams should do it. Bringing in Elijah Robinson too. You got a big-time coaching staff, a big-time group of guys who can go out there and get talent into that program. It'll be interesting. Again, I'm kind of with you. They're probably a year or two away. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Again, not a ton of head coaching experience, obviously, but that's an exciting hire you can get behind.
If you're an athletic director of a Power 5 program like Syracuse, you're keeping your eyes on how this works. Because if it does work with Fran Brown, like that's where you got to go. Go get a young recruiter that can bring in talent and then just kind of hope that they can kind of acclimate as a head coach. And they got Fran Brown learning from Kirby Smart, not a better mentor to run a program than what Kirby's done in Georgia. I'm out on Pitt. Like I think Narduzzi and that Pitt program trending down. Stanford, really tough spot. Virginia, I like Calandra at quarterback. I don't like Tony Elliott. I don't really like that roster. Boston College, Bill O'Brien is an interesting hire. I just don't think that roster is in a good spot. And then Wake Forest, as a Wake Forest guy, this one hurts. But Dale, you talked about a team that I think really benefited from having those extra COVID years and now having those COVID guys graduate after playing 8-9 seasons.
A team that sneaky put together an absolute run of quarterbacks, and that kind of ended last year where you just didn't get anything near what they had. But when they went from
Johnny Wofford, John Newman, Sam Hartman,
had three really good college quarterbacks who played really good in that system. And when you don't have it, you kind of notice like that team's a little outmatched by most teams.
Well, that's where it starts. The talent acquisition for Wake Forest wasn't there. And I think Dave Kloss is a phenomenal developer. And now kind of thinking about it, I probably like Wake Forest more than I like BC, Virginia, Stanford. But you're right. Like this was they had some really good quarterback play, but they don't recruit at a high enough level. I think they're not trending in the right direction. I think we'll leave it at that. It hurts me to say it. It was a fun couple of years for Wake Forest, but that's probably where we stack them up. That'll do it, Dale. ACC, going to be a wild conference. We'll re-rank these guys.
ACC I don't think they get nearly the respect they deserve as a conference as a whole. Like I hear these, it's a power two. I mean, yes, the SEC and Big Ten might be a little deeper, but at the top end with the resurgence of Miami, and if Clemson can bring it back, obviously Florida State's kind of there. They're there, and then you look, that's not a bad four teams in the middle, especially when you could look at like some of the Big Ten teams.
How many teams do you think get into the college football playoffs from the ACC here? Two. That's what I'm thinking, two, but two with the potential of three. I think if it all shakes out, because like I think all those three teams at the top, if the math works out, which I'm not smart enough to do in my head, and you talk about Miami, Florida State, Clemson, all having 2 losses, like they're all going to have arguments to be in the college football playoffs. We'll end it at that. Appreciate you guys, as always, rocking with the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, drop your ACC rankings in the comment section. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.